I mentioned that you're both ranchers. What does it mean to be a rancher? We want to talk about giving and we're going to talk about generosity, but first, what's a day in the life look like?
Well, I think that it really has changed through the years, right? Of whenever I was being raised. We're nearly 100 years old here at this ranch, but we grew up. I'm in Southwest Texas. It's right between Bracketville and Del Rio, Texas. So for a bigger city, from San Antonio, we're 120 miles west. So we're right on the Mexico border, Del Rio, Texas. So where we are, like into town where this wool and mohair business was my great grandfather started, called Del Rio Wool and Mohair. That was the place where ranchers would take all of their wool and mohair. So you'd shear your sheep and you'd shear your Angora goats, like Angora, sweaters and things like that that's made out of. You would shear twice a year. So you'd put that in those sacks, right? I remember just stomping down those wool sacks and we'd load those up onto a trailer. And then you would take those into town. So then they would sell this, and then this would be all over the country where you might see some of these woolen products that would be sold in different places. But that's where we grew up, because this part of the country, Southwest Texas, was that. But as of recent, as I think about coming down and people laugh at me, our friends that have never been in the country, our driveway, it's a couple miles down the road to get to the house, but is that now, because of the coyotes and cara birds, we really have had a hard time because of lambing when our sheep would have babies, or, kidding when our goats would have babies. They were really eaten up by coyotes or these cara birds that would take care of them. So we now raise cattle. Pretty much raising just cattle here at the ranch, and then we have hunters. But we grew up in kind of a different type of way of rounding up sheep and goats more than even cattle, and grew up rodeoing. So our family was really close. We didn't have phones at that time, and so you would just load up and you go to rodeos on the weekend, and you were roping calves, or you were running barrels or running poles, and that type of thing. So that was kind of our ranch life and how we grew up. But my great-grandfather and grandfather, and then my dad is still ranching. He's 84 years old. So It's been in the family for a long time. But
has that changed the lifestyle in any way, shape, or form?
I think a lot, actually. It was lots of sheep and goats back in the day is what we really raised. When you look at that and now have the cattle. The shift of a lot of folks aren't coming from generation to generation in the ranching world, because it can be tough. I feel like if ranchers aren't really turning over to the next generation in an earlier stage, really it becomes where they sell those ranches. Or so I do feel like maybe that is a little bit different. Where I feel like it's really the same is ranching and farming folks, agricultural people. I mean, really, when I was out in Judea and Samaria, working hard, those little hilltop communities, doing it together, caring for each other, you knew your family place is still there.
So
it's still a very much thing where everybody comes together and you're working for the same thing, but it is different because I feel like maybe it's not generation. Now you're having a few places being sold.
right. So I want to talk about things being sold and everything from from one family maybe to another, or from agriculture to data centers. And maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm going to shift for one moment from Lashawn over to Revis. Revis, you said you married in to the ranching community, if you will. Why would you marry into ranching?
Interestingly enough, my grandfather used to herd cattle open range from Texas to Wyoming. He would play the fiddle around the campfire. And when he decided to settle down at 35, he bought him a little spread, as we call it in Texas, up in the Panhandle. And my mother was raised on a small ranch. My father was raised as a farmer. And then when they married, they moved to West Texas and both became educators. So
Okay.
I was hearing of the world of ranching, of farming, and then being right in the throes of educating. But the funniest part of it all is that I went to a summer camp that was a ranch, and I met my husband when we were 13.
Oh my
Of
God.
course, we went our separate ways for 2 decades. And then when he tracked me down, the idea of actually initially I didn't want to be a rancher's wife. It is tough work. And then that principle alone is profound giving. profound giving. But in the end, I came to a place where in my heart, I was content with it and I loved it. So now I drive, like you said, 2 miles down a dirt road just to get to the front door of the house from the farm to market road or the state highway, depending on which way we come in. We are located in Pecos County. The county seat is Fort Stockton. That's where we check our mail. My husband's family has been there since 1906, and it's passed through the generations. So, we're now 5 generations strong in Pecos County. But in the end, when I married my husband, he said, I promise you I will never be a sheep and goat rancher. And he has stayed true to his word. We shifted to cattle, although we're not big cattle barons. We just have a few. But my brother-in-law, who shares the inheritance with my husband, he raises a pretty significant number of cattle, as does my father-in-law. And my husband and I have shifted more to the hunting side. You heard Lashawn mention we have this, and we have hunters. And so it's typical in West Texas that you lease parcels of land for hunters to come in and look for varmints or for deer. We're very, very rich in mule deer and whitetail. And so people love that kind of meat. And so
Right.
we provide that as well. We built a high fence, and our day-to-day routine includes hunting exotic animals like elk or red stag, axis, black buck, various other kinds of antelope or exotic sheep and goats.
So, I mean, you've taken us all the way across not only the great expanses of Texas or even just your backyards, but into all these different kinds of industries and sub-industries of farming, of ranching, of the different kinds of cattle, the different kinds of livestock, and the process that each of your families have undergone essentially over a number of generations. So one thing I think that everyone who's watching, listening, tuning into this is understanding that there's something deeper here than just happening to live on a ranch, right? There are the family connections, there's the history, and that obviously bears a lot of significance to each of you.